Salam alaikum, alaikum salam, this is Tata Matamba. Today we're doing a video on the relationship or marriage within Palo Mayombe. We're going to be starting off with a little bit of history within the Bakongo around the 1800s or late 1800s about the process of getting married within their culture. And then a little bit after that, we'll speak about Palo Mayombe, relationship advice, marriage within our practice, within today's date, right? We have to understand that the Bakongo, right, they have their own culture. They do things a little bit different. They see things a little bit different, especially during that time, during the late 1800s. Not like in the Congo today that they're a little bit more updated. They lost some of their roots, but they also implemented other things, right, from the new world, technology, etc., etc., etc. But we're going to go ahead and start with the Bakongo marriage. A man searching for a wife must meet certain customs or cultural requirements. And before we continue, I want to go ahead and clarify a little bit on the perspective that the Bakongos, especially in the 1800s, right, viewed marriage, right, or the word marriage. The word marriage is sompa, which it means to borrow or to hire. In essence, right, it's a contract. The man borrows or hires the woman, and in return for the use of the woman, he lends on his part a certain amount of money, right, of money to the woman's family. And the way the Bakongos, right, within their culture, the way they see the woman is extremely valuable, right? A woman in the Congo is the best investment that a man can do because a woman is literally the backbone. And I know for us, within the Bakongo, right, within the Bakongo, the way that they see marriage is more of a transaction. In some cases, there is emotion, right, from my studies, from the anthropology and the history that I have read, but it's more of a transaction in that sense. So now we can go ahead and continue. I want you to keep that always in mind. It's more of a transaction in the sense because it's for the community. So one of the first requirements or certain customs, right, that a man has to do is called menga mamosi, right? He must not marry within his clan because they share the same blood. And it's very important, this, because it can cause issues to the offsprings. He must speak with the potential wife's maternal uncle, Ngundi a Nkasi. And he'll go, right, speak to this uncle, and he'll bring palm wine, and he will let that uncle know that he's interested in marrying his niece. And the uncle, would drink the palm wine, and they'll get into an agreement that he'll find out or speak with the father and the mother of his niece, right? And that uncle and the groom, right, the man who wants to be the groom, will set a further date or further within time. They'll have another interaction. He'll be like, come back on this day. And that uncle will go speak to the father, and he'll speak to the mother, and obviously the soon-to-be wife or bride will be there also. And money, right, currency, value would be spoken of. Then the uncle would go back to the future groom, and he'll let him know, hey, this is how much she's worth, or how much the father and mother are willing to give, what you have to pay to take, right? Their daughter in that sense. So he must speak with the potential wife's maternal uncle, right? The Ngundi a Nkasi. After he does this, the uncle, once the man, right, the groom has that money, right, has the value that he's gonna pay that family to take that woman because she's very valuable within that clan, within that kanda. He goes and the uncle introduces the future groom to the bride's father. And they'll speak, they get to their agreement. But in the sense, at the end of the day, the bride needs her mother's consent to marry. The one who also has to make that decision is also the mother. Does the bride have to consent? Not necessarily, in that sense. And why do I say not necessarily? Because it doesn't have to be emotional. It does not have to be an intimate or a sexual transaction between the groom and the bride at the end of the day. But these are the steps, right, that a man has to do. So now let's go ahead and continue on to the actual festival. So the wedding festival, the groom arrives at the bride's town or kanda with a few of male friends and shows aggression and makes as much noise as possible. This lets that community know that he's a protector, that he's a leader in that sense. And then Nata Nkento happens, right? The carrying the woman away or the bride away in that sense. Reaching his town or kanda, right? Music is played, signifying the beginning of the festival. Much wine is drunk, many goats and pigs are killed and eaten. The future groom's community, right, would like to know what kind of seed the bride can give, right? The community of the future grooms, right, looks for a girl, right, or a woman from a polite, hardworking, or loving family. A community of good mothers with no history of food poisoning or any issues, because that will eventually bring, right, or cycle issues within their community and vice versa. That's why the mother within the bride's community, right, has to accept that her daughter gets married with that man, because that man can also be a drunk or be abusive. So if the mother doesn't like her future son-in-law, right, we're gonna call it like that, son-in-law, then those things, that marriage or that relationship or that transaction, that contract at the end of the day, sompa, right, marriage cannot happen. So it's very complicated. They look at marriage because very, very different than we do, extremely different than we do. They take it extremely serious. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like we say in Spanish, right? You just don't marry the woman, you marry her family. It's the same way within the Bakongo. They take that very seriously. You just don't marry the woman, you marry the whole clan, the whole tribe in that sense. So now a real question is, what about if a woman doesn't want to marry that man, and things that the man do, right, the groom can do to attract women in that sense? We're going to go ahead and get into that, right? Finding acceptance from a woman. A man can tell if a woman has accepted his intentions and desires of his heart. But if he has any doubts on the matter, he goes and sees the Bayanganga, the medicine man, to obtain a love potion, a filter. This love potion is made up of certain shrubs and roots, but in particular the nsaku. It's a odoriferous root and mokongo seeds, right? Mongongo seeds. These ingredients are pounded and mixed well together. Then the Bayanganga introduces it into a bottle of palm wine for the woman that the groom or the man desires, and then she'll drink it. And this is kind of like a love potion in that sense from his kanda. The Bayanganga, the traditional doctor, right, will make this potion and give it to, his patient, and he'll go out and, feed this or give this to the woman that he desires in that sense. And she would also, he'll have to go through the same procedures, but she would also go willingly because she loves him in that sense now. We kind of do that, right, within Cuba, within now modern days, these love spells and all these things. But it's not recommended, right? These things are not recommended because if a traditional healer or what they consider a witch doctor or another priest finds out, it's not, those intentions or emotions are not there from the heart. We're going to go ahead and look at the picture for the Insaku and the Mongongo, right, seeds that they'll use, right, in that sense. So let's go ahead, let me go ahead and pull up the pictures. This is the Insaku, one of the roots or primary herbs for this love potion. And this is the Ngongo or Mongongo seed that is also used in the love potion. So now we can go ahead and get into the polygamy, right, within the Bakongo marriage. A man may marry as many wives as he can take care of. The woman, however, can only have one husband. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, he has to pay a heavy fine to her husband. Sometimes a husband finds a suitable young man and permits him to have intercourse with his wife. And this is what I was talking about earlier, right? Marriages sometimes doesn't mean that there's an actual sexual intercourse between the bride and the groom. Sometimes the groom or the husband allows the wife to have a sexual intercourse with somebody else, in that sense, because the wife is just the backbone of that clan or that tribe, right? Is looked as a contract, an agreement in that sense. So, the culture is a little bit different than ours. Actually, it's a lot different than ours, but within the Bakongo these days, I don't think, they practice this in that sense so heavily. Only specific tribes maybe still practice this. Now we can go ahead and get into the divorce, right? A woman is not permitted to break her agreement or marriage with her husband. If, however, she manages to break her agreement or marriage, her family will have to return the marriage money and pay 1 or 2 or even 3 or 4 pigs as a fine to, her ex-husband. Now, a man will ask a woman or a divorced woman or even a young bride, how many times or how many men have she slept with since her divorce. He will threaten to test her by bois kia nkasa, and that means trial by the nkasa tree. And there's certain medicine, that they'll do, and we'll go ahead and get into that now, in that sense. But I want you guys to understand, right, before we continue, that their culture's a little bit different than ours, right? From our Western perspective, and especially these days, right? This time in the world. The bois kia nkasa, divination by the nkasa tree, which is a small dose of the nkasa tree is given to the person being accused. If he or she vomits, they are guilty. If they don't vomit, otherwise. There's other trials like bois kia mbele, by a hot knife. Trial by a hot knife. A knife is made hot and then passed throughout the body, certain parts. If the person is not burnt, he and she, he or she, right, is innocent. If they get burnt, they're guilty. There's Buakia Maji, boiling oil test. The accused puts their hand in boiling palm oil 3 times. If they don't get burnt, they're innocent. And there's different ways of doing this. The Bakongo will do these certain tests. More specifically, the Ba and Ganga would do this. Obviously, the ancestors and the spirits had to do with these things, right? They'll call the ancestors forth, and they'll make sure that the person wouldn't get burned because she was saying the truth, the person's ancestors in that sense, and or get burnt with the oil, get burnt by the knife, or wouldn't vomit in that sense. Now let's go ahead. I think I have some pictures here for certain knives of the Bakongo that they would use. I don't think that they use this knife in particular. It's just a knife from the Bakongo. There's many swords and knife and tools from the Bakongo because they were very artistic people. Here's a picture of the palm oil, and the way that they put the pot on top of those rocks and all that. It means things. That's Makuku Matati, the 3 firestone rocks. And that's how they would always cook their foods and certain things within their community. Now, relationships in Palo Mayombe. Some houses won't initiate couples. And why is this? Because we're going to look at it from the standpoint of the godfather, right? The godparents in the sense. Godparents really don't like gossip issues within their households at all. And if they have 2 godchildren that are married, right, or they're already married and they're going to get initiated together, some houses, not all of them, some houses only initiate one, and they recommend the other person to get initiated somewhere else because that godparent don't want to be between the sword and the wall when it comes to picking sides in that sense. So some houses will initiate couples that are already married, others won't. I particularly believe that, we have to differentiate things in a godfather or godparents have to understand that personal life is personal, and, our practice and our tradition is separate, even though they're very close knitted. Another says you shouldn't date your god siblings. If you get initiated into a house and you're single and there's other god siblings there, I highly recommend not to date within that household, in that sense, because if there's issues, you and your godfather, you might put him between the sword and the wall. Your godparents, you might put him between the sword and the wall, and that brings gossips and issues, and you're always going to have to see that god sibling or your ex also. So that person will never stop being a god sibling in that sense. It says, try not to mix your personal relationships with your spiritual life. And what it means by this is if you have inquisis or any of these things that are in Cuyo, or even if you don't have any of this stuff, try not to bring your relationships into these practices, right? In the sense of issues, right? If you and your wife or your spouse are having issues, you should not, tell everybody in your household or tell your godfather any of these things. I feel like you should be mature enough to handle these things outside of an Inso Congo, right? Outside of the house of the spirits, in that sense. Within Palo Mayombe, marriages or a marriage agreement exist. Yes, they do. It's not a question, it's a statement. There are certain ways that people can get married, and you're like, well, that contradicts. You're like, well, you shouldn't mix your personal relationship within your spiritual life, but marriages exist. Yeah, what I mean by a marriage is an agreement. Some houses automatically do it, others might not. That's what I'm saying. It's specific to each household. Sometimes the godfather initiates two people, and if one cheats, there can be a penalty with that. It might be you get kicked out the house, or you pass away, or these tragic things within life. If you beat your wife, or your wife hits you, or there's disrespect, or there's any of these things, you're going to have consequences to that, not just by cutting the relationship, but also by a spiritual attack within that household. Now, there are other tatas, right, or other houses, or other godparents, or some godparents that they don't even deal at all within the relationship. They just say, hey, keep things respectful. I can initiate, couples, or I have no issues. My god siblings dating, in that sense. But I don't want to get into any of these things. If you have problems or you have anything, that causes issues between you guys, that has nothing to do with the godparent. He separates, he distinguishes those things, and he has no say in it at all. So you can't go to your godfather or your godparents searching, right, for medicine. When I'm speaking about medicine in the fact, because we have to differentiate the difference between doing medicine inside the Insokongo and your godfather as an advice, right? Him giving you advice, or your godmother giving you advice on your relationship. There's two different things: receiving advice from the spirits, or doing medicine with the spirits, and receiving advice from your godparent, either or your godmother or your godfather. So we have to differentiate these things. So, before you get initiated in a house, if you're going in single, or if you're going in with your spouse, I highly recommend to speak to your godparents. Speak and have things well defined, so there's no misunderstandings or miscommunication. Other houses, like I said, they're gonna have, they're gonna say, I don't initiate both, because at the end of the day, I don't want to be put between the sword and the wall. Whoever comes first, then Kisi's approved, perfectly fine. The other person will have to go to another house. And if things go south within there, spiritual wars or any of these things can happen in that sense. But you have to speak with your godparents and see how mature and how they run things at the end of the day. Hopefully you guys grasp the concept within the Bakongo in the early 1800s, in the way of their culture, and understand some of the advice within our tradition within Palo Mayombe, and differentiate the two. And like the video, you guys enjoyed the video and learned something new today. I'm gonna go ahead and leave you guys with Nsinga Dikanda Ninga Katu Bukako. Always uphold the tradition. Always make the right decisions for the tradition. Like, share, subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Thank you guys for your time. Salam alaikum. Malaikum salam.